Every war movie you have watched has been lying to you about tanks. And this isn't just small lies, but physics-defying lies aimed at dramatizing moments that would have gotten real tank crews killed in a matter of seconds. But beyond the madness, the chaos, and special effects, one movie managed to create one of the most accurate depictions ever. So, what have 90% of Hollywood movies gotten wrong about tanks? And how did one movie from 1977 get it all right? The most obvious mistake seen in almost every modern tank movie, especially the likes of Fury, is the high-speed tank duels. This involves tanks racing through open fields, chasing one another while firing with such accuracy that it can knock out a tank on the move. What's more is that both the attacking and defending tanks are moving at these speeds, but one single shot from the attacker could knock out the enemy. It sounds extremely impressive, but it is a far cry from reality. In fact, tank experts agree that even if a World War II tank moved at just 10 miles per hour and they had to fire at a target 500 meters away, it would have a less than 1% chance of hitting its target. Now, this sounds ridiculous given modern tanks, but back in the Second World War, advanced stabilization systems were just a dream for the future, with gyroscopes of the time making it impossible to fire. It was actually the Germans who figured this out first, but the Allies soon caught on. They realized that firing on the move was just a colossal waste of shells and a surefire way to run out of ammunition. They had a rule that tanks only fired once they stopped and had time to stabilize. It was only the M4 Sherman with its one-axis vertical stabilizer that could fire somewhat accurately when coming to a slow stop, but still nowhere near the accuracy of modern tanks like the M1 Abrams. Yet this isn't even the worst mistake made by Hollywood movies, just the most common. One film that quickly comes to mind is Rambo 3, where our hero commands a powerful Soviet T-55. Yes, this might not be a World War II tank, but it still manages to make tanks seem more Hollywood than reality. Unlike the film, tanks are not bulletproof rampaging machines, they are vulnerable as hell. Even the famous Sherman would catch fire from just a single Panzerfaust, which earned it the nickname Ronsons, after a lighter that was so reliable. It lit up every single time. Even the German Tiger would quickly catch fire when it was bogged down in mud by just a handful of Molotov cocktails, proving exactly how fragile they truly were. It might have been a beast on paper, but in close combat, the armored sides were as thin as paper. As tank expert Nicholas Moran put it, tanks never won battles on their own like the movie Fury suggests, but it was a team effort with infantry screening for any flankers and artillery softening targets before the big tank barrage tries to smash through weakened defenses. But even then, it is not just a single tank, but a battalion, and some will not survive. If you have ever watched any Hollywood movie, you will see the protagonist never running out of ammo. Whether it is Rambo destroying an army by himself, or the Normandy landings of Saving Private Ryan, just continuously belting the enemy with shells. In some cases, it can even feel like a machine gun repeatedly firing rounds. But this is just another Hollywood myth. In reality, tanks are not an endless fireworks show. Since these shells were large and heavy, most armored vehicles only carried a finite number. In fact, the M4 Sherman could carry about 66 shells for the 105mm howitzer, or just around 71 for its 70mm. On top of this, it took a good 10 or 15 seconds for a loader to reload that massive 20-pound shell in a sweatbox hotter than a sauna. Miss a beat, and you are dead. So while Saving Private Ryan shows tanks firing shells like water hoses, the reality is that M4s stationed at Omaha actually preserved ammo for strategic breakthroughs, making sure that each shell fired was deliberate. Also, it would have been impossible for crews to keep on reloading at such speed, and unlike Hollywood, there was no director to call cut when the reloader needed to take a bit of a break. Then there is the one-man army myth. Turning back to our favorite mullet-wearing superhero Rambo, no one can forget Stallone solo driving and gunning his T-55 like a video game joystick through the rugged terrain. It was a piece of Hollywood magic, where John Rambo hops into a solo tank and dodges Apaches, while single-handedly firing more accurately than a fully trained M1 Abrams crew. But the reality is far different, and no one in the real world can operate a tank all by themselves. In fact, a standard tank crew is a highly trained team, which often consists of a commander, who spots the targets. Then there is a driver who ensures that the tank doesn't end up in a ditch, while a loader is almost like a mule just continuously reloading the gun, while the bowgunner offers additional machine gun support. Taking on this task solo would lead to definite blindness, deafness, and ultimately death within just a few seconds after somehow managing to fire the first round. Yet there is one thing about tank crews that movies like Fury do get right: the crew banter. Since these tank crews eventually turn into brothers due to the time spent together and the grind, having a little bit of banter when there is no active combat is natural. It is something found in almost every tank crew and helps the team build trust among one another. But let's say a tank gets hit. What happens then? Now, the M4 Sherman might have lit up like a Ronson lighter, but those booms and explosions were just another bit of Hollywood special effects. Again, turning to Fury, you can see in the climax how that Tiger blows up like a gas station gone wrong. But this is far from the truth, and tanks don't just pop like popcorn. In fact, when a tank is hit, it depends on the location, with many often aiming for the tracks. When a tank's tracks are damaged, it is basically a sitting duck, but when it is hit more on the top, the shells explode, sending shrapnel in every direction. The Tiger, for example, had ample armor that allowed the crews to escape after the hit. When the engine took a hit, it was different, but still not a massive explosion. It was more common for the engines to catch fire, slowly burning the tank to the ground, but Hollywood loves their explosions. Perhaps the only tank that might have exploded when struck correctly was the German Panther, which famously stored its shells in the side sponson. This became a big target for the Allies, and could leave crews dead with just a single impact. Read any tank manual and you'll see the instructions: flank or hull down, not jousting. But in Hollywood, having two tanks sit hundreds of meters away from one another, trying to land a shot, is boring. In fact, it will slow down the pace of the whole movie. So, it is much easier to treat tanks like medieval cavalry with a commander shouting, "Charge!" and the tank driving as fast as it possibly can into the enemy. Yes, it is gutsy, but tactically, you are almost certainly dead. In the film Fury, that 76mm is powerful enough to punch through anything frontally at close range, which would have made the entire charge pointless in any way. By looking at some historic battles such as El Alamein, most are won through ambushes and not charging in like cavalry and being ripped to shreds by anti-tank guns. Erwin Rommel proved this in Farica by pointing his Flak 88 directly at the British tanks and ripping them to shreds. Firing a tank with those mechanical and old optical sights was unreliable, but during the Second World War, it was the only thing they had. However, visibility is bad, and a spotter cannot always see everything around him. So what Hollywood has done to mitigate this is fascinating. If the crew cannot see, someone simply pops the hatch, exposes themselves, and commands where the tank should fire. But that was a sure recipe for destruction. Band of Brothers got this one right, with the crew remaining buttoned up regardless of the visibility. Yes, visibility is key, but losing a crew member could possibly derail an entire mission. Then there are the shells that just keep on going and going. The 75mm tank round was extremely powerful, but when Hollywood got their hands on it, they took it one step too far. They loved to show how a tank shell could penetrate a building and continue through many more walls before it simply just disappears or explodes. It makes for some incredible action, but the reality is far different. When a Sherman shell hit a wall, it would more than likely explode, leaving a massive hole in the wall. Anything closely stationed behind the wall would be destroyed, and the building might even collapse if the wall was load-bearing. But a tank hidden behind it would not even get a scratch on it and have more than enough time to change its position. Even the powerful German 80mm couldn't destroy a wall and continue. The Germans quickly learned to use explosive rounds, where they'd destroy an entire building to expose what was hiding behind it. But that would probably cost Hollywood too much to continually build and rebuild the structure. Yet nowadays, CGI would make it easier. One Panzer commander even wrote, "The Americans thought we could shoot through their cover, we let them think that." But in reality, they were safe. And then there are the infamous tank rams. Another truly dramatic Hollywood moment came when tanks were seen ramming into each other. It was extremely dramatic, with tanks spotting each other and then putting the tank into a massive gear, pinning its ears back and smashing into the other tank like a bumper car. The reality was far different, and in most cases a tank wouldn't even come close to another before it was obliterated at close range. That's why tanks chose to move around the battlefield like snipers, firing from one location before quickly moving around and firing another salvo before they were targeted. In fact, tank ramming happened only 3 times that we are aware of, and this was usually when one tank ran out of ammunition or in a moment of pure desperation. When the tanks did ram into each other, it was tons of steel that basically broke the drivetrain, and crews had to finish the rest of the battle up close with machine guns. The Soviets actually banned the use of this tactic unless it was a last resort. So how did one movie from the 1970s manage to get everything right? In 1977, Sean Connery was part of one of the best war films ever made. Called A Bridge Too Far, it shows how important strategic positioning was throughout the war. But it's the use of tanks that were incredible, often being used in the exact same way they were designed to be used during the war. Panthers were hidden, and German panzers often retreated before launching new counterattacks. The main focus was to secure bridges, which were extremely important to move this massive armor across the battlefield. But not to give away any spoilers, any real tank enthusiast should consider watching this film in a time where CGI was yet to be revolutionized in the way it is today. Even tank expert Nicholas Moran gave it an extremely high rating. And best of all, the tanks used for the film were made from plastic. Bet you couldn't tell that. But being part of a tank crew was an honor, and many of them were hailed as heroes following the war. Unfortunately, the Panther was one of the most expensive mistakes the Germans ever made. Check out this video to find out why.